I reside in Burt County, North Carolina, near Morganton, where I've grown accustomed to the serene lifestyle that accompanies rural living. While we do encounter the occasional eccentric characters, it's usually not cause for major concern. My husband and I own a lovely piece of land. My work schedule varies, alternating between day and night shifts. This particular incident occurred during one of my night shifts, around 3 a.m. My phone was on the brink of running out of battery. Hunger and exhaustion weighed heavily on me as I yearned for a quick meal before heading home. I decided to make a stop at a gas station to refuel and grab a packaged sandwich, which I leisurely consumed inside the station's cafe. During my time there, I noticed a suspicious individual observing me, and he left without making any purchases. After finishing my meal, I ventured outside to fill up my gas tank, only to be greeted by an overpowering gasoline odor. The dark, winding roads at this late hour demanded cautious driving, especially considering my fatigue after a long day of work. Suddenly, my car's gas gauge needle plummeted to E, accompanied by the ominous low fuel light and an alarming beep. Baffled by this unexpected turn of events, I initially assumed it was a computer glitch. I pulled over, restarted the car, but the needle remained steadfastly on E. I attempted to continue, but the engine sputtered and died, sending me into a panic. Without delay, I reached out to my husband, who answered my call. I frantically asked him how my car could run out of gas immediately after filling up. As I exited the vehicle, I detected the distinct smell of gasoline. Sharing this with my husband, he speculated that there might be a fuel leak. He assured me he'd rush over and contact our roadside assistance service. However, as I waited, a car approached with its headlights turned off, stopping just a short distance behind my car. The unsettling memory of the suspicious man at the gas station resurfaced, and I voiced my concerns to my husband, questioning whether he might have tampered with my car. My husband's tone shifted, indicating heightened concern, as he acknowledged the possibility of the man damaging the fuel line. Uncertain about the implications, I knew I had to take action. I removed the keys from the ignition, locked the doors to extinguish the headlights, and with my phone's battery at a 2%, I requested my husband to text me once he was close. Subsequently, I fled the road, seeking refuge in the nearest house I could find. Sprinting down the lengthy driveway and reaching the front door, I rang the bell multiple times, despite the house's lights being off. Eventually, a man in his 60s, appearing as if he had just woken up, opened the door. I urgently pleaded to be allowed inside to both hide and charge my phone. After explaining my predicament, the man welcomed me inside. I requested an iPhone charger, and he agreed to search for one, then directed me to the living room to take a seat. Clad in my nurse scrubs, I experienced a mix of emotions. As the man went to the kitchen to fetch some water, I happened to glimpse his reflection in a living room mirror that offered a view into the kitchen. I observed him fill a glass with water and surreptitiously add something to it. Although he moved out of the mirror's view, the sound of the running faucet persisted for about 30 seconds before it was turned off. Returning with the glass of water, he handed it to me, and I expressed my gratitude. Sitting across from me, he gazed intently and asked for a recount of the situation. I reiterated my need for a charger to contact my husband. He acknowledged this, excused himself, and headed upstairs. With my phone's battery dwindling to just 1%, I seized the opportunity to send my current location to my husband for safety. Suspicion mounted as I inspected the glass of water, although it had no discernible odor. The man returned downstairs, informing me he had no iPhone chargers due to using an Android device. Upon hearing this, I promptly rose and made my way to the door, determined not to take any unnecessary risks. Once outside, I raced down the driveway to the road, overwhelmed by a nauseating sensation. My phone's battery finally gave in, but I continued to wait along the road's edge, behind a row of trees. As I saw my husband's familiar headlights approaching, I stepped onto the road, frantically waving my arms in relief. Thank goodness it was him. As I entered the truck, I released a torrent of emotions, recounting the harrowing events I had just experienced. My husband drove us to my car, finding that the mysterious car was no longer behind it. However, my rear window was shattered, and it was evident that someone had gained access to the back seat. Fortunately, there were no valuable items left in my car. My car's battery was also completely drained. When I shared my encounter with the man who had seemingly attempted to tamper with my drink, my husband was consumed by anger and desired to confront the individual. I, however, urged caution, opting to wait for the tow truck to arrive. We endured a lengthy wait until the tow truck arrived, transporting my car to the dealership for repairs the following day. My husband's suspicion proved accurate. My car had been vandalized, and the fuel line had been intentionally severed. I was grateful for the few days off work that followed, providing me with the necessary time to recover mentally from the events of that fateful night. The realization that I had narrowly escaped two potentially dangerous encounters with suspicious men in a single night was a sobering experience I couldn't easily forget. This incident took place way back in 2008 when I was 18 years old. At the time, I resided in Uvalde, Texas, which was a low-income neighborhood that typified rural Texas, found outside major cities. The nearest city to my location was San Antonio. Due to financial constraints, I was attending a local community college, which was the best my parents could afford. One of my closest friends from high school, Andrew, had moved to San Antonio to attend San Antonio College. He lived in a small apartment just outside the city with a roommate, and his girlfriend frequently stayed with him since the city was only an hour and a half away. I often visited him, and one weekend, he invited me to stay over. For this trip, I relied on my trusty but beat-up 1995 Toyota pickup truck, which, truth be told, was in terrible shape. The gas gauge didn't work, so I had to keep track of when I last refueled and reset the trip mileage. I took Route 90, a direct route from Uvalde to San Antonio, leaving around 3 p.m. on a Friday with minimal traffic. I reached Andrew's place in good time, and since his girlfriend was due the following day, we decided to head out for the night. We started at a liquor store, spent some time drinking at his apartment with his roommate, and then headed to a dive bar that was somewhat lenient with fake IDs. That pretty much summed up our night, and we returned to their apartment around 2 a.m. After grabbing some food, I crashed on their couch. The following day started similarly, but tensions between Andrew and his girlfriend escalated. As they both got progressively drunk, she began yelling at him in front of me, making the atmosphere uncomfortable and awkward. Given the situation, I decided not to drink much that day, as I was already hesitant about staying the night with her around. Eventually, I chose to head back home, bid everyone farewell, and set off. It was very late at night, around midnight, if not a bit earlier. Route 90 was deserted at this time, so I sped up for my truck standards. However, my heart sank as the engine suddenly started sputtering. I realized I had forgotten to fill up the tank, and although I slowed down, it was too late, the engine died. I pulled over to the side of the road and tried to restart it to no avail. I pulled out my equally unreliable cell phone to get a signal, but it was hopeless. I couldn't even call for help. So, I switched on my hazard lights and hoped that a good Samaritan would pass by. The time I spent waiting by the side of the road felt excruciatingly long before I finally saw headlights. I waved my arms as the car approached, but it sped past me, ignoring my pleas. This happened again after another 10 minutes or so. At this point, I was growing desperate, contemplating spending the night in my car until sunrise when I could seek assistance. So, that's what I planned to do. I got back in my car, removed the key from the ignition to conserve the battery, and reclined the seat to get some sleep. I could hear the occasional car zooming past, approximately every 10 minutes, but it didn't seem worth flagging them down in the dark. It felt sketchy for both me and the passing drivers. As I was drifting off to sleep, a car door closing behind me startled me awake. I checked the rearview mirror and saw a car parked behind me with its headlights off. I turned around to get a better view, It was a large pickup truck, but I couldn't see anyone inside or outside of it. Perhaps someone had pulled over to assist, I thought. I cautiously stepped out of the car and asked, "Excuse me," but received no response. I approached the truck to verify that no one was inside and then returned to my car. The situation was growing increasingly strange, and I scanned the area around the road, thinking someone might be relieving themselves in the woods. I re-entered my car and locked the door, feeling increasingly uneasy. Suddenly, there was a tap on my window that made me jump. I looked and saw a man peering into the car, smiling. I didn't react immediately. He said, "Hey, buddy, do you need a hand?" I lowered the window slightly and replied, "I ran out of gas." The man responded, "That's quite the predicament. Step out and give me a hand with this real quick." Thinking he meant that he needed help with a gas jug or something, I exited the truck and shut the door, expecting him to lead me to his vehicle. Instead, he stood there, still smiling, looking down at me because he was much taller, and he said, "I need you to empty your pockets, please." It took a moment to comprehend his request. I was a broke college student driving a beat-up truck. I wasn't about to be robbed of the little cash I had and my phone. So, I made a run for it in the direction of the trees. I may have been small, but I was fast. I glanced back to see him chasing after me. Once I made it into the trees, I zigzagged to lose him, crouching behind a large tree to catch my breath. When I heard him approaching closer, I held my breath, paralyzed with fear. I heard him utter, "I'll kill you, you piece of shit." I couldn't tell if he was merely venting his anger aloud or if he intended for me to hear it, but I was too terrified to move. Even after I heard his footsteps moving away, I remained in my hiding spot for the rest of the night, finally emerging at dawn. I returned to the highway, but the truck that had parked behind me was gone, and both of my truck storage compartments had been opened. I discovered that my glove box had been rifled through and emptied of anything of value, and my flannel hoodie, which had something in its pocket, was also missing. Eventually, I managed to flag down a good Samaritan who gave me a ride to the nearest gas station. I bought a fuel can, filled it with gas, and he drove me back to my car. I added enough fuel to my tank to make it to a gas station and then headed straight home. This experience served as a real-life lesson about the existence of both unscrupulous individuals willing to take advantage of vulnerable situations and the presence of good-hearted people like the one who came to my rescue. When I was 18 years old, I exhibited significant immaturity and naive. I regrettably displayed impatience and rudeness while driving, often resorting to honking and nearly cutting off other drivers. Looking back on those actions, I can only describe them as foolish. Reflecting on it now, if I were to have children in the future, I would undoubtedly impose stricter rules regarding their driving behaviors. Nevertheless, it's worth mentioning that I did accumulate a considerable amount of driving experience for someone of my age. This was partly because I attended a school that was a 5-hour drive away from my home, and I frequently traveled back and forth. No matter which day of the week it was, traffic consistently became a nightmare as I approached my hometown. To circumvent this issue, I adopted the habit of driving home during the night on breaks, which reduced my travel time from 4 to 5 hours down to just 3. One particular incident stands out in my memory. It occurred at the start of winter break after the conclusion of the fall semester. While all my friends had headed home on the same day, I decided to wait until later in the evening before departing. My disdain for traffic was my primary motivation. At that time, I drove a Mazda 3 that I admittedly drove quite recklessly. I was also known for pushing my luck by consistently driving with my gas tank near empty. People would comment on it when they rode with me, and I would always confidently assure them that there was at least 30 miles left even after the fuel gauge reached E. However, the night I was driving home from school, I discovered that my assurance was misplaced. I had been on the interstate for only about an hour when the fuel gauge hit empty, and I was waiting for a gas station sign instead of consulting the map for the nearest one. Suddenly, the car began making strange noises and jerking. It became clear to me that I might have genuinely run out of gas this time. Desperate, I exited at the first ramp, hoping it would lead me to a gas station. Regrettably, this exit was shrouded in darkness, lacking streetlights, and surrounded by woods on both sides. Fearful of slowing down and potentially running out of gas before finding a station, I rushed through the stop sign at the end of the ramp and took a sharp turn onto the intersecting road, which was equally dark and enclosed by dense woods. It was a dire situation, and my car eventually came to a halt as the engine sputtered to a stop. Matters took a turn for the worse when I realized I had no cellular reception. I used T-Mobile, known for its unreliable service far from major cities, and I attempted to call 911, mistakenly assuming it would work without reception. Predictably, it didn't. I was gripped by terror as I sat in my car with hazard lights blinking, anxiously waiting for anyone to pass by. It felt like an eternity before I spotted approaching headlights. When the vehicle passed by, I flashed my headlights to signal for help. To my relief, the car made a U-turn and pulled up behind me on the grass. However, I had no idea who was stepping out of that vehicle, and I was an 18-year-old girl, feeling vulnerable. As the man approached my car, I cautiously lowered the window slightly and informed him of my predicament. I had run out of gas and needed assistance. He offered to give me a ride to the nearest gas station and appeared to be a trustworthy, bald man wearing glasses. With no apparent alternatives, I reluctantly accepted his offer. Before leaving my car, I made sure to lock the doors. His car was a black 2010 Honda, but it emitted an unusual odor that I couldn't identify. We made another U-turn and began heading in the direction we were originally traveling. He engaged in conversation, asking me where I was from and other basic questions. I answered honestly, explaining that I was driving home from school. He mentioned that he lived in the area and mentioned that they rarely saw out-of-towners exiting the interstate for this quiet little town. The route we were on seemed devoid of any buildings, with thick woods on both sides. I inquired about the location of the nearest gas station, to which he replied that it was a little farther ahead. However, as we drove, I began hearing unsettling noises from the back of the car, sounding as if they were coming from the trunk. Initially, I thought it might be bumps in the road or a loose object in the trunk. The man kept talking incessantly, and we eventually reached an area that appeared more like a small town. There were lights, buildings, a diner, and a few small houses, which was a welcome change. As we approached the first intersection since I had entered his car, the silence fell, and it was then that I heard unmistakable screams coming from the trunk, followed by frantic thumping and banging sounds. We both turned to look at each other, and in that split second, I unbuckled my seatbelt, opened the door, and fled, while he attempted to grab and pull me back into the car. I heard him get out of the car as well, but instead of pursuing me, he rushed to close the passenger side door. Then, I heard his footsteps heading down the street. I ran into the diner, creating a scene and urgently requesting assistance. The diner staff allowed me to use their phone to call 911, and I waited there. Given the gravity of the situation, I reported hearing someone in the trunk of the car. Multiple police officers arrived at the diner to take a detailed statement. They needed every piece of information about the man, his car, and the location where he had picked me up. They also facilitated my contact with AAA, which eventually arrived to refuel my car. This terrifying experience left me shaken to the core for the rest of my journey home. I can only hope that they were able to locate the man and that the person in the trunk is alive to this day. It's frightening to consider that the man may have been taking me to his house or some other unknown destination, and I was fortunate to escape when I did, at that fateful red light. Please subscribe to the channel if you liked the video. Thanks for watching.